Shocking words from Lewis Hamilton to Kimi Antonelli after the young driver's pole position in the Miami Sprint. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Under the molten haze of a Florida sunset, as palm trees swayed just beyond the fences and the reverberating bass from a nearby fan zone rattled metal shutters and plastic barriers alike, something truly unforgettable took place in the humid belly of the Mercedes garage. It wasn't caught by the live broadcast. It wasn't packaged in sound bites or dramatized by commentators. It wasn't the result of a crash, an overtake, or a championship-deciding moment. And yet, for those who were there, mechanics, engineers, team personnel, a handful of insiders, it felt monumental. Not for the noise it made, but for the silence it created. A silence of realization, awe, and emotion. The kind of silence that only descends when history quietly shifts in front of your eyes and doesn't ask for permission. Lewis Hamilton, the seven-time world champion, widely regarded as one of the greatest athletes in the history of motorsport, moved through the crowded workspace like a force of gravity. His presence always changes the temperature in the room. But this time, it wasn't for himself. He wasn't walking to debrief. He wasn't preparing for a media appearance. He wasn't reviewing telemetry. He was walking, deliberately, calmly, purposefully, toward a young man who, moments earlier, had stunned the entire paddock with a performance that defied logic, experience, and expectation. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Kimi Antonelli, just 17 years old. Still in his debut season. A rookie not only by age but by experience. Someone so new to the relentless political machine of Formula One that he still asked where to stand before press conferences. But none of that mattered now. Because in one magical, almost surreal lap around the unforgiving wall-lined street circuit of Miami, he had detonated every assumption about rookies, about readiness, about potential. He didn't just go fast. He went faster than every single world champion on the grid. Faster than Verstappen. Faster than Leclerc. Faster than his teammate, George Russell, who had been tipped to inherit the throne Hamilton is preparing to vacate. Faster than anyone thought possible. A 1 minute and 26.384 seconds. 0.2 clear of Max. 3 over George. 4 ahead of both Ferraris. The margin wasn't small. It was emphatic. It was loud without saying a word. The data told a story that even the most seasoned engineers struggled to explain. He didn't get lucky. He didn't catch a tow. The wind didn't shift. The track temperature didn't magically drop. He just drove, flawlessly, ferociously, fearlessly, in and out of the corners like he had memorized every bump and grain of asphalt. Balanced under braking. Laser-sharp on turn-in. Committed on exit. His throttle modulation through Sector 2 alone was enough to make grown men shake their heads in disbelief. In the garage, there had been cheers. People shouting, hugging, clapping, disbelieving what they'd just seen on the screens. Some mechanics stared at the live Delta feed in total silence, double-checking their readings. One of the veteran engineers muttered, "That's not possible," while running the same overlays again and again, expecting to find a glitch, a bug, a typo, anything to justify what the rookie had just done. Antonelli stood off to the side. Not celebrating wildly. Not raising fists. Just breathing, slowly, heavily, trying to process what had just happened. His cheeks were still red from the helmet. His undershirt was soaked in sweat. He still held his gloves in one hand, like he didn't know what to do with them. He looked less like a superstar and more like a student who had just accidentally passed a test he hadn't studied for. And then Lewis arrived. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. No entourage. No cameras. No sponsors watching. Just the legend, walking slowly, quietly, eyes locked on the boy everyone else had just begun to understand. When Hamilton reached him, there was no hesitation. He offered a hand, then wrapped Antonelli in a hug that lasted just a few seconds longer than expected, not awkwardly, but intentionally. A gesture full of respect, acknowledgement, even something deeper. Understanding. When they separated, Hamilton said something, just for Kimi. No one heard the words. But the reaction said enough. Antonelli smiled. Not a cocky grin, not a media smile, but a human one. The kind that says, "Thank you. I needed that more than you know." In that moment, the past touched the future. The king met the one the sport is beginning to whisper might be next. But there was no rivalry in it. No tension. Only reverence. It was as if Hamilton, who has spent 2 decades breaking barriers and rewriting the rules, saw not a threat, but a promise. A reminder that the sport still has magic left. That the fire he once brought into the paddock hasn't been extinguished, it's just taken on a new shape. Around them, engineers resumed work, but their eyes kept glancing sideways. Conversations in hushed tones broke out in the telemetry room. Track analysts in Brackley began pulling Antonelli's data to cross-reference against Lewis's historical bests. And George Russell, who had gone into the weekend with every reason to believe this team was his, found himself facing questions that hadn't been asked before, not out loud anyway. Elsewhere, Verstappen's camp began analyzing Antonelli's lap frame by frame. At Ferrari, the mood grew tense. Antonelli was supposed to take time, be manageable. He wasn't supposed to arrive this ready. Some teams began recalibrating their scouting reports. A few even floated inquiries, unofficial indirect, about Antonelli's long-term contract terms. Mercedes, aware of the goldmine they've uncovered, said nothing. But the internal atmosphere shifted. This wasn't just about potential anymore. This was about performance. Cold, hard, race-altering performance. Right now. And for Lewis, perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps it was a mirror. A reminder of the boy he used to be. The one who shocked the establishment in 2007. Who walked into Ron Dennis's empire and refused to blink. Who believed, truly and fully, in his own ability long before the world did. Maybe in Kimi, he saw that spark again, and maybe it moved something inside him. Not jealousy. Not regret. Just peace. Because maybe now, Hamilton knows the future he helped build is in hands worthy of it. No formal announcement was made. No press release crafted. No camera flash captured the exact moment their hands met. But everyone who was there felt it. Something changed. Something shifted. A guard began to pass, not by force, not by resignation, but by acknowledgement. Antonelli didn't say much. He never does. But when he finally spoke to the media later that night, his words were careful, measured. He thanked the team. He said he was still learning. He said the real work had only just begun. And yet, there was something new in his tone, not arrogance, not entitlement, but certainty. He knew. He knew. Because one of the greatest to ever grip a steering wheel had looked him in the eye and without saying it directly, told him, "You belong here." And from this point forward everything, for Kimi, for Lewis, for Mercedes, for Formula One itself, will never be quite the same. No formal announcement was made. No press release crafted. No camera flash captured the exact moment their hands met. But everyone who was there felt it. Something changed. Something shifted. A guard began to pass, not by force, not by resignation, but by acknowledgement. Antonelli didn't say much. He never does. But when he finally spoke to the media later that night, his words were careful, measured. He thanked the team. He said he was still learning. He said the real work had only just begun. And yet, there was something new in his tone, not arrogance, not entitlement, but certainty. He knew. He knew. Because one of the greatest to ever grip a steering wheel had looked him in the eye and without saying it directly, told him, "You belong here." And from this point forward everything, for Kimi, for Lewis, for Mercedes, for Formula One itself, will never be quite the same. The noise inside the garage wasn't just excitement, it was kinetic, primal. The kind of energy that doesn't come from expectation, but from something no one had seen coming. There was shouting from the mechanics bay, laughter from the data analysts clustered around screens, whispers turning into wide-eyed disbelief as the times updated on every monitor. Kimi Antonelli's name sat above Verstappen's, Leclerc's, Sainz's, names that usually dominated the top of the sheets like permanent ink. Not today. The garage floor trembled with adrenaline. Engineers clapped shoulders. Tire techs hugged. One of the mechanics, a man with 20 seasons under his belt, had to take a step back and wipe his eyes before anyone noticed. It wasn't just a fast lap. It was a statement. A warning. An arrival. The lap itself was already being dissected frame by frame. He'd taken turn 9 with a mid-corner minimum speed no one thought the car could handle without bottoming out. His entry into the chicane was so tight the simulation team thought it had to be a rendering error. Sector 2, fluid, ferocious, fearless. The throttle trace showed confidence far beyond his years. No hesitations. No feathering. Just commitment, clinical, controlled, and somehow still completely instinctive. And just as the celebration began to crest, just as people started to process what had just happened, a new current of tension cut through the garage like electricity. Lewis Hamilton had seen it. The timing screen was still bright on his tablet, the sector deltas illuminating his face in quiet disbelief. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't reacted. But those closest to him recognized the change, the shift in his body language, the sharpness in his eyes. A man like Lewis didn't need to ask questions. He understood what he was seeing. He felt it. P5 in Q3 had already been a bitter pill. Traffic in Sector 1, a rear that wouldn't rotate the way he needed it to, and a setup compromise that left him half a tenth off apex after apex. He knew the lap was gone before he even crossed the line. But it wasn't anger that settled in his chest. It was something else, an unmistakable gravity pulling him away from the noise of his own frustrations. He removed his gloves slowly, like someone taking off armor. He stood without a word. Those around him, already seeing the storm in his eyes, instinctively cleared a path. He handed his tablet to the nearest performance engineer and said the only thing that needed to be said. "Where is the kid?" He moved without spectacle. No entourage. No camera crew orbiting him. Just Lewis Hamilton, stride deliberate, focus absolute. The paddock around him sensed something important was happening. The conversations quieted. Heads turned. Reporters paused mid-question. He wasn't looking for attention, but attention found him anyway. He walked past PR handlers trying to gesture him toward the mixed zone. Past a social media producer holding a microphone. Past photographers who froze with cameras half-raised, unsure whether to shoot or stay respectful. The crowd near the Mercedes garage parted almost instinctively, like a tide pulled back by something larger than itself. Kimi was near the back of the bay, still in his race suit, his balaclava around his neck, hair damp with sweat, body buzzing with the aftermath of the impossible. He hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Still trying to catch up to reality. His trainer was talking, but Kimi wasn't listening. The moment was too big, too loud, too unreal. And then he saw Lewis. For a second, time slowed. That's how people would later describe it. Like the moment stretched, suspended in some untouchable space. Kimi didn't know what to do. He shifted slightly, looked up, then froze. But Hamilton's face wasn't cold. It wasn't distant. It was fierce, focused, and most of all proud. He stepped in, no hesitation, and extended a hand. Kimi shook it, unsure whether to say something formal, something safe. But Lewis pulled him in for a quick one-arm embrace. Firm. Final. The kind of hug that didn't need to be explained. And then quietly, so only a few nearby could hear. "You're not a rookie anymore." Those 5 words hit harder than any trophy. More than any podium. Kimi exhaled like he hadn't realized he was holding his breath. "Thanks, man. That lap, it felt like I was floating." Lewis nodded, still watching him with the eyes of a driver who knows the difference between luck and legend. "You weren't lucky. You were deliberate. That wasn't a fluke. I saw your corner speed into Sector 2. You stayed on throttle when the rear was twitching. You didn't fight the car, you read it. That's not training. That's instinct." Kimi looked away for half a second. Almost shy. "I didn't think it'd be enough. Max, Charles, I figured one of them would beat it." Hamilton's voice sharpened. Not cruel, convicting. "You don't need to wait for them anymore. They're waiting for you now. You set the bar today. Don't step back from it. Don't shrink. Stand in it." Kimi's eyes changed. That flicker of self-doubt, slowly replaced by something steelier, clearer. Around them, the garage continued its rhythm, but it felt different. As if everything had reoriented. The axis had shifted. The energy was no longer just around Antonelli's lap, it was around the conversation. The moment. Mechanics pretended to keep working, but they were watching. Engineers with radio headsets lowered the volume just to hear better. Everyone was absorbing this. The past and the future of Mercedes F1, face to face. But it wasn't confrontation. It wasn't a farewell. It was something few had ever witnessed. A moment of unguarded truth between titans, one rising, one enduring. Lewis didn't linger. He looked at the timing screen one last time, nodded, and turned to go. But before he left, he paused. Just briefly. Then said, without looking back, "Enjoy tonight. Tomorrow, you defend it." Kimi didn't speak. He just watched. Jaw set. Breath steady. And the world watched with him. Because that was the moment it changed. Not when Kimi set the lap. Not when his name lit up the charts. But when the man with 7 world championships, hundreds of battles, and decades of weight on his shoulders looked at a 17-year-old and saw not a threat, not a novelty, not a story, but a successor. Would you like the next part to show the media frenzy and how the team reacts to the growing spotlight on Kimi? Toto Wolf had remained silent for most of the session, hovering at the edge of the Mercedes garage like a general surveying the terrain before battle. His usually unreadable expression had cracks in it today, creases at the corners of his eyes, a flicker of hesitation every time a new data set lit up the monitors. The Miami heat pressed down on everything. Not even the massive paddock fan swirling overhead could stop the sweat gathering along his jawline. His shirt clung slightly to his back. His sunglasses, ever present and carefully chosen to project composure, now hung and used from the open collar of his shirt. There was no hiding the fact that something was different today. Something in the air had shifted. Across the garage, Kimi stood by the car still half-strapped in, his hair damp under the helmet, his fingers twitching from the leftover voltage of adrenaline. The cockpit had left marks on his shoulders. His breath came fast, uneven. His lips moved like he wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the right words. Everything around him was still in motion. Technicians moving like clockwork, engineers analyzing live data feeds. But for him, time had slowed. He just posted the fastest sector time of the session. In Lewis Hamilton's car. Toto finally stepped forward. He walked slowly, deliberately, cutting through the noise and fluorescent lighting like a man walking into a boardroom moments before a hostile takeover. He looked at Kimi, then at the engineers, then back again. "Well," he said, tone light but edged with something harder. "I suppose now I'll be getting questions I'd hoped to avoid." He tilted his head toward the car. Lewis is going to want to know why the rookie is running faster with the floor upgrades. There was laughter. Polite. Nervous. Measured. The kind of laughter that comes when people aren't sure if a joke was really a joke. A few glanced toward the rear of the garage where Hamilton was leaning against a tire stack, arms folded across his chest, watching everything unfold. He wore that expression only those closest to him knew how to interpret, part amusement, part evaluation, part veiled warning. Then he pushed himself off the tires and walked forward, slow and deliberate, like a veteran entering a ring after watching someone else steal the crowd. The smile came first, crooked, charismatic, familiar. But his eyes were locked on Kimi with pinpoint intensity. "Don't get too comfortable, kid," he said, half mocking. "You're not allowed to steal all my toys and my thunder in the same weekend." A few nearby chuckled. A few didn't. Because they could feel it too. There was tension here, not hostility, not jealousy, but weight. Hamilton walked right up to Kimi, then glanced at the car, then at Toto, then back. "You better not be giving him both of my floors," he said, mock accusatory, but layered in subtext. "I still got a few miracles left in me." More laughter. This time warmer. More genuine. Even Kimi grinned, if cautiously. He wasn't just in the spotlight now. He was the spotlight. But what happened next wasn't theater. It wasn't banter for the cameras or a choreographed media moment. Lewis closed the distance, rested a hand on Kimi's shoulder, not the casual pat of an elder driver giving a rookie a nod of approval, but the solid grounding grip of someone about to pass down something hard-earned. His voice dropped, low enough to cut through the surrounding buzz without drawing attention from the boom mics hovering nearby. "Tomorrow's sprint," Lewis said, the gravity in his voice unmistakable, "is not going to be like anything you've done before. Qualifying is precision. Controlled. Polished. This." He shook his head. "This is raw. The lights go out, and it's chaos. You're not just defending pole. You're defending territory. You're defending everything." Kimi didn't blink. Lewis kept going. "You'll have 20 wolves behind you. But only one of them will matter at the start. Max." He said the name without flinching, without venom, but with absolute clarity. He's going to test you from turn 1. He knows you're new to this level. He's going to weaponize that. He'll fake outside. Make you twitch. Then he'll cut in so late, you'll think he forgot to brake. But he didn't. He wants you to flinch. That's where he wins. In the hesitation. Kimi swallowed. Lewis stepped a bit closer, still locked in, still calm but intense. Don't give him space unless you're absolutely sure he's earned it. Not an inch. Keep your trajectory. If he commits, fine. But don't second-guess yourself. Don't try to drive his race. Drive yours. You've got one job, own that first lap. Plant yourself. Force him to go around. Make him question you. Kimi nodded slowly, every fiber of his being absorbing the words. This wasn't a speech. This was instruction. Strategy. Warning. Encouragement. Challenge. Hamilton didn't believe in sugarcoating. He believed in preparation. There's a reason I've survived this long, Lewis added. It's not just talent. It's clarity. When the world goes loud, fans, lights, engines, heart rate, you have to go quiet. That's when you find the edge. That's when you win. Then he pulled back slightly and studied Kimi again, like he was measuring the response, watching to see if the kid had cracked or held firm. He saw what he needed. He gave a small nod, then peeled off his gloves and pressed them into Kimi's chest. You've earned this moment. But don't think it's a gift. It's a test. Show them why you belong here. And then he was gone, vanished into the shadows of the garage like a ghost slipping back into legend. The moment didn't end. It lingered. Everyone around them had stopped pretending not to watch. They had witnessed something they wouldn't forget. A moment between generations. Not a passing of the torch, but a forging of it. Toto stood still, arms crossed again, his jaw set. He had said nothing during the exchange. But now, as Lewis disappeared into the back of the motorhome and Kimi stood staring at the gloves in his hands like they were relics from an ancient war, Toto finally whispered, just loud enough for the race engineer beside him to hear, I didn't schedule a coronation this weekend. But maybe the kid just earned one. Would you like the next part to explore how Verstappen responds to this new threat, or to dive into the chaos of the sprint start with radio messages, team strategy calls, and on-track drama? The humidity in Miami was thick enough to feel like a weight pressing against the skin. The track, still shimmering from the heat of the day, rested under a cloak of tension no camera could capture. Mechanics moved with a rehearsed urgency, engineers adjusted numbers they'd checked a dozen times, and PR managers double-checked statements that hadn't been written yet, but would be, depending on how tomorrow unfolded. The world was watching, not just because it was race weekend, but because something unusual, something undeniably human, was happening behind the polished facade of the Mercedes garage. Kimi Antonelli sat in the stillness, eyes locked on his visor, the same one he'd be wearing in less than 24 hours when he rolled up to the grid as pole sitter for the first time in his life. His fingers flexed involuntarily, as if already gripping the wheel. Every muscle in his body was wired for motion, but now he had to be still to absorb. Across from him sat Lewis Hamilton, not as a teammate, not as a rival, not even as the 7-time world champion, but as a mentor who had once been exactly where Kimi was now, young, brilliant, uncertain. There was no crowd here. No cameras. Just two men separated by a generation but joined by the same fire, the obsession that drives those who don't just want to win, but need to. Hamilton leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, his voice barely above a whisper. But every word landed like thunder. Don't just memorize the start, he said, eyes locked on Kimi's. Feel it. Sleep with it in your mind. Visualize it until your dreams can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. Hear the clunk of first gear. Taste the tension. Smell the clutch. Know the exact sound of the final red light before it fades. Kimi blinked slowly, nodding, but Hamilton wasn't waiting for responses. He was transmitting experience the way only someone who'd been burned by glory could. They're going to water the right side again in the morning. They'll say it's for track balance. It's not. It's PR. They want close racing for the cameras. That patch you're starting on? It'll be slick. Not terrible. Just enough to delay your launch by 2/10 if you're not expecting it. Compensate early. Adjust your torque map. Slightly raise the bite point. But don't spin the rears, because if you do, they'll eat themselves by turn 5. The advice wasn't random. It was a blueprint. And Kimi, young though he was, understood the gravity of what was being given to him. These weren't race tips. They were the keys to a kingdom forged in agony and triumph. Hamilton kept going, barely pausing to breathe. This circuit's a trap. Miami's got no flow. You think it does because it's flashy and fast in the simulations. But in real life, it's chaotic. The rhythm breaks every time you settle in. That's by design. It's meant to fool rookies into overdriving. You get aggressive, you'll ruin your tires. You get too careful, you'll get mugged on the straights. There's no middle ground unless you create it. He shifted slightly, his eyes scanning the data screen beside them, more out of habit than necessity. Turn 14's the danger zone, he said, tapping the telemetry. It's not just about exit traction. It's about managing the rears. Everyone thinks that long straight afterward is where to recharge, but they're wrong. That corner right before it, that's where you win or lose the race. If your rears are too hot, you'll slide. If you slide, you'll lose speed before the straight. And then you'll be a sitting duck into turn 17. Antonelli was listening like a soldier to a general before battle. He hadn't moved in minutes, frozen not from nerves but from sheer concentration. Hamilton could see it. He remembered being that still, when stillness wasn't calm, but the mind's desperate attempt to prepare for war. And the DRS zones. Hamilton continued, eyes now narrowed, tone even sharper. Use them. But don't rely on them. Defend early. Not late. Leave just enough room to make them commit, then close the door hard. Clean but hard. This is a street track, but the stewards will let things go if you show control. Don't weave. Don't second guess. Decide and execute. Outside the motorhome, the sun dipped lower over the city skyline, casting long shadows across the paddock. The music from the fan zone had grown louder, but inside, the silence between Hamilton's words said more than any soundtrack. He leaned in one final time, lowered his voice again, not for secrecy but for intimacy. The crowd's gonna scream. The lights will flash. Celebrities in pit lane. Pool parties in the grandstands. Champagne before the race even starts. Don't look up. Don't look anywhere. Your world exists only inside that halo. No distractions. No theater. Just focus. Miami will try to sell you a fantasy, but you're not here for a show. You're here to write history. And then finally, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, Kimi spoke. Were you nervous? He asked. The first time you led a sprint? Hamilton's expression didn't change. His eyes remained calm, but something in his voice carried weight, the kind you only hear in those who've won, lost, bled, and come back again. No, he said. But I was alone. Kimi nodded. He understood. In those 2 words was a lifetime. Just then, footsteps approached. Toto appeared, his voice as direct as ever. Lewis. Setup review. Hamilton stood, stretched, rolled his shoulders. He turned back to Kimi, one last glance, one last truth. You're on pole. Don't race like you're defending something. Race like it's already yours. Don't focus on corners. Focus on what happens after the flag. Feel the win before it happens. Don't just cross the line, own the damn thing. He walked away. But Kimi wasn't alone anymore. He carried more than a setup plan. He carried belief, someone else's belief, infused into his blood. As Hamilton disappeared into the engineering room, Kimi called after him. Lewis. Hamilton paused at the doorway, turned without a word. Thanks, Kimi said. No bravado. No pretense. Just raw gratitude from a rising star to the man who had just lit the torch. Hamilton smiled, gave a single nod, and was gone. The Mercedes garage didn't celebrate. It didn't need to. Something far more significant had taken place. A generational shift. Not manufactured. Not media-driven. Real. Tangible. Felt. From the engineers tweaking brake balance settings to the tire crew prepping the Pirellis in silence. From the marketing team sending delayed press releases to the mechanics who'd been here since the start of the V6 era, everyone knew. The team had fractured weeks ago. broken by headlines, scandal, fists behind closed doors. But now, there was something new. Something sacred. A rookie had pole. A legend had given him more than just tips. He'd handed over a piece of a legacy forged in 1,000 battles. Across the paddock, other teams noticed. Not with panic, but with respect. You could feel the shift. In the way Red Bull engineers double-checked Max's launch maps. In the way Ferrari called a second simulation meeting after midnight. In the way McLaren strategists pulled Lando aside for an unscheduled one-on-one. The world would wake up tomorrow expecting a race. What they'll get is something far rarer. The moment a dynasty dies and a new one breathes its first breath. Not in a press release, not in a headline, but in silence, speed, and the heartbeat of a rookie who is no longer just a name on the entry list. He's the lead car on the grid. And behind him, watching, guiding, guarding, not competing, but completing something, stands Lewis Hamilton. One chapter closes. Another begins at full throttle. Would you like the next chapter? What happens when the lights go out?